Welcome to the second of the six talks on Germany between 1815 and 2015. This is the second one where we begin to look at Germany proper, Germany as a fully unified, constituted state, and basically the creation of Bismarck. We looked at in the previous talk a little bit about how the founding impetus was for this Germany, and obviously it was what we saw was it was from conflict, and in fact through these three wars. That's a major error there. The Danish War of 1864, the Austro-Prussian War of 1866, and then the Franco-Prussian War again between 1870 and 1871. Through these three wars, Germany was unified, but with Prussian dominance. And as I said before, the key architect of this was Otto von Bismarck. And here we have a very brief biography of him. Key thing here, he is part of the Junker aristocracy. And he saw the way, or his ideology is very much governed by that class. Here are some assessments of him. The Mad Junker, as he was seen earlier on in his career. Later on, he becomes seen as the White Revolutionary, very much set up the idea of Realpolitik. In other words, doing things, basically politics as what is doable rather than based on specific principles or ideological considerations. How far was he a German? How far was he simply a Prussian? And how far was it down to him, and how far was it down to luck? Here we have the constitution of the German Empire. It was an attempt at a form of governance, but with the emperor at the top. It was still autocratic, but there were elections. And it was elected by all males over the age of 25. However, the Reichstag could not determine the government. That was the sole preserve of the Kaiser. So in other words, it didn't matter who won the elections, which parties won the elections. The Kaiser decided on who would become the government. Okay, so this was a key thing. And he was in charge of most things, and he had full approval of all federal laws. The problem, of course, was what was Germany? Was it meant to be liberal? Well, it has elections, but at the same time, it was governed by a conservative Junker aristocracy who didn't really want a united Germany. And of course, with German industrialization taking place from the 1860s, 1870s onwards, you get a larger growing working class that was very much aware of itself and wanted to have a hand in power. Also, there were large minorities, so-called minorities. Poles, basically Poland didn't exist. The present day Poland covers much of the area with it, which was in the German Empire between 1871 and 1918. Danes to the north, Alsatians, which were French-speaking by and large, to the west. Other Germans who didn't have the same views as the Prussians, Bavarians, Hanoverians, who had basically the kings did exist still in those areas. And of course, in any German history, we have to have an understanding of the Jews themselves, who were by and large integrated into Germany. Now, later on, when we've looked at Weimar Germany, we've talked about a population of around 500,000 Jews in Weimar Germany. That wasn't the case in the German Empire, since the German Empire was much larger. So what was the Kulturkampf? Well, this was the background for it was the idea that, first of all, the papacy published the doctrine of papal infallibility. In other words, the Pope could not be wrong. Okay, this was seen as a challenge to the new Germany, and so there was growing tension between the Catholic Church and the German state, and we can see here more and more laws being taken in, created so that the Catholics had less and less power, or certainly the Catholic Church had less and less power. One of the other great organisations that had power and growing power throughout this period was, of course, the SPD, the German Socialist Party, the oldest socialist party, certainly in Europe, created in 1869, well before the British Labour Party, and it creates this Gotha programme. And one of the key things about that is the fact that it was a Marxist party pledged to overthrow the established bourgeois order, although through legal means, not through revolution. To counter this, Bismarck was a canny old devil, and so he made sure to try and sort of take away parts of the working class. He introduced quite a lot of state reforms which would help the working classes. So things like the Sickness Insurance Act, Accidental Insurance Act and Old Age and Disability Act were brought in the 1880s, well before, again, what was happening in Britain, well before that. These were provisions by the state for the helpless and the poor. There was also anti-socialist legislation, okay, because state socialism was obviously seen as a great un-German ideology, since the idea behind it was that all people, no matter which state they belonged to, were the same. And through the use of this anti-socialist laws, trade unions, the SPD, were spied upon. Organisations were broken. Meetings were broken up, and publication and distribution of socialist literature was outlawed. When Kaiser Wilhelm I died in 1888, you get this period known as the Year of Three Emperors. Frederick III takes over, but has to step down and eventually dies, and then Wilhelm II takes over, and he is the one who starts to change the idea of Germany, rather than taking on people within Germany itself, minorities, parts of the German population that they saw as threats. He looked beyond. He wanted a place in the sun, an empire, and part of what he was doing obviously fed into the steps towards the First World War. And this obviously went completely against Bismarck's view. He saw that he'd created this network of alliances throughout Europe, whereby Europe wasn't at war, or if it was not the major states. They had an understanding, and he was the spider in the centre of this web. And he saw Wilhelm II as the one that was sweeping away this by creating new differences, antagonisms with their neighbours. The key one, of course, was Russia. France was always going to be against Prussia for defeat in the Franco-Prussian War. France always wanted to surround Germany and then eventually to attack it, and that meant an alliance with Russia. Bismarck ensured that this would never happen. However, through his alliances, or his workings about the idea of empire, Wilhelm started to fray at the edges this system of alliances, and in the end Bismarck was dropped, and this is the idea of dropping the pilot. And Bismarck eventually is dismissed. So what sort of an assessment do we have of him? Well, he creates peace. After the years of war, he creates peace for around 19 years. Germany is economically developed or developing throughout this period, pioneers the idea of state socialism. He worked closely with national liberals, implemented many liberal policies, was not a dictator, his powers were limited, and he worked with the parties in the Reichstag, and his long tenure in power points to his political skill. However, he was responsible for France remaining isolated and embittered. His influence has been exaggerated, and this is an interesting area of debate. He used his attacks on minorities to whip up patriotism. The culture camp was a major miscalculation. His anti-socialist policies were unsuccessful, and he was unable to delegate and was jealous of perceived rivals. And finally, he had left behind a flawed legacy. Bismarck's rule led to Wilhelmine and Nazi Germany. In other words, this is all part of this special path, or the Sonderweg. You need to decide which of these is the most dominant narrative that you feel happy with, based on the evidence, of course.